Eleanor Vance, history teacher, 47, adjusted her reading glasses. Another textbook, another late hour. The soft light of her lamp cast long shadows across the living room of her perfectly ordinary, slightly dated suburban home. Outside, the crickets sang their endless chorus. Inside, absolute peace. Until the hum changed. Not the AC, something else. A tiny, almost imperceptible click from behind the old fireplace mantel. Eleanor froze. Her heart gave a sudden, hard thump against her ribs. She wasn't just a history teacher, she was a history nut. She noticed patterns. She remembered details, and that click. That wasn't a house settling, that was deliberate. She slowly, carefully got up, every muscle tense, her gaze fixed on the mantelpiece. Reached out, her fingers brushing the cool, rough brick. Nothing. She tapped, hollow, too hollow. A tremor ran down her spine. What she found next wasn't a mouse. It wasn't a faulty wire. It was a tiny, intricately wired device no bigger than her thumb, tucked expertly into a specially carved cavity. A device that pulsed with a faint, almost imperceptible green light. A listening device, not the cheap kind. The kind you saw in old spy movies, except this wasn't a movie. This was her living room. And the click she'd heard. It was the sound of it being activated. Suddenly, the crickets outside sounded less like nature and more like surveillance. The familiar hum of the AC, a cover. Every shadow in her ordinary home wasn't just a shadow anymore. It was a potential hiding place. Her world, once predictable, safe, known, had just dissolved. And she wasn't just a teacher anymore. She was a target. But before we dive deeper, if you're fascinated by these hidden histories, by the brave individuals who unearth the truth against impossible odds, then you absolutely need to like, subscribe, and comment where you're watching from. It means a lot to us. We appreciate your support. Eleanor Vance wasn't born for espionage. She was born for order, for facts, for the satisfying click of a well-researched footnote. Her days at Northwood High were a symphony of lesson plans, grading essays on the Treaty of Versailles, and trying to ignite a spark of interest in the Cold War in kids whose biggest concern was their TikTok feed. She loved her job. She loved the quiet rhythm of her life. She was, in every sense of the word, ordinary. But that night, holding the tiny, alien piece of technology, ordinary evaporated. It wasn't just in her house. It was for her house, for her. The green light pulsed, a silent accusation. Who? Why? The questions hammered at her, each one more terrifying than the last. She thought of calling the police, but what would she say? "Officer, I found a tiny spy gadget in my fireplace." They'd think she was watching too many thrillers. And what if the person who put it there was listening right now? The first instinct, the rational one, was to dismiss it. A prank, maybe. A kid from school. No. This was too sophisticated, too hidden, too professional. Eleanor was a historian. Her mind naturally sought patterns, anomalies, discrepancies. This device was a gaping, screaming anomaly in her perfectly normal existence. She spent the next few days in a fog. Her lectures on the Cuban Missile Crisis felt eerily prescient. Every student who looked at her a moment too long, every passing car, every shadow seemed to hold a sinister meaning. She started scrutinizing her home, her sanctuary, with new, paranoid eyes. She checked behind paintings, under furniture, inside vents. Nothing, just the dust bunnies of an undisturbed life. The device itself was a puzzle. No visible branding, no identifying marks. It was encased in a sleek, almost organic-looking material. She dared to poke it with a pencil. It felt surprisingly robust. It was designed to blend in, to be forgotten, to listen. And it had been listening. For how long? Her mind raced through her life. Had she said anything controversial? Was she unknowingly involved in something? No, her life was an open book. Teaching history, volunteering at the local library, a quiet book club. She barely even argued with the cable company. But then she remembered a series of small, almost comical inconveniences over the past few months. Her internet randomly disconnecting for brief periods. Her landline occasionally making strange, static-filled noises. Her mail sometimes arriving a day late, with faint, almost invisible smudges on the seals. Each incident, isolated, was easily dismissed. Together, they now formed a chilling mosaic. They weren't inconveniences. They were indicators, signs of activity. It wasn't just the device. It was the careful, almost surgical placement. Whoever did this knew her house, knew her routines, knew her. The thought made her skin crawl. It was an invasion far more profound than a simple break-in. It was an invasion of her privacy, her thoughts, her very solitude. She thought about the people around her, her colleagues at school, her neighbors, the unassuming faces she saw every day. Mr. Henderson, the math teacher who always had a bad pun, Mrs. Garcia, the librarian with her endless supply of herbal tea, and then there was Mr. Davies, Arthur Davies. He lived 2 doors down, a widower, moved into the neighborhood about a year ago, said he was a retired engineer, always impeccably dressed, even for grocery runs. Quiet, polite, kept to himself. Always offered a small, knowing smile when they passed each other walking their dogs. He'd helped her carry groceries once when her car broke down. Seemed like a perfectly decent man. But Eleanor, the historian, knew that history was rarely what it seemed on the surface. She recalled a conversation with Mr. Davies a few weeks prior. He asked about her teaching. "Oh, you teach the Cold War. Fascinating period. Such intricate layers of deception, wouldn't you say?" His eyes, though, had been too intense for casual conversation, too sharp. She dismissed it as an older man's intellectual curiosity. Now it felt like an interrogation, a probing. The Cold War, a war fought not with tanks and trenches but with shadows and whispers, with listening devices hidden in fireplaces. The irony was a bitter taste in her mouth. She taught about this stuff. She researched it. She lectured on the intricate networks of spies, the double agents, the desperate scramble for information. But that was history. That was something that happened there then. Not here, not now, not to her. She carefully, meticulously removed the device. She didn't want to destroy it. She wanted to understand it. She wrapped it in a piece of lint-free cloth, placed it in a small, airtight container, and hid it in the one place she knew no one would ever look, deep within a dusty box of her old high school yearbooks, beneath a photo of her awkward teenage self at prom. The clock ticked. The night deepened. Eleanor didn't sleep. Her mind, usually a reservoir of historical facts, was now a turbulent sea of suspicion. She had just discovered a glitch in her matrix, and she had no idea who had planted it or why. But one thing was clear: her ordinary life was over. The game had begun. The next morning the world looked different. The meticulously manicured lawns of Elmwood Drive seemed less picturesque and more like a carefully constructed stage. The friendly waves from neighbors felt less genuine and more like practiced gestures. Eleanor, usually lost in thought about the Peloponnesian War, found her senses heightened, every detail magnified. She was now a detective in her own life, scrutinizing every nuance. Her first act was to verify. Could this device be some kind of novelty, a prank gone wrong? She spent hours at the local library, not in the history section, but buried in obscure technical manuals and old news archives, under the guise of researching a new lesson plan on Cold War technology. Her fingers flew across the keyboard, searching for images, schematics, anything that matched the silent intruder from her mantelpiece. What she found sent another jolt of ice through her veins. The device, or something strikingly similar, had appeared in intelligence briefings from the late 70s and early 80s. Codenamed Cricket, it was a passive acoustic sensor, incredibly difficult to detect, designed for long-term surveillance. Soviet-made, state-of-the-art for its time. Not a prank, not a novelty. This was the real deal. The implications were staggering. If this was a Cricket, it wasn't just some random bug. It was a tool of serious espionage. And if it was Soviet-made, it implied something even darker, a relic of the Cold War, active now in her house in her quiet American suburb. Who would be using such a device now? The Cold War was over, wasn't it? Or was it just hibernating? Her gaze kept drifting to Mr. Davies' house. 2 doors down, a freshly painted porch, geraniums blooming in window boxes, so perfectly normal. Too normal. She remembered his intense eyes, his pointed question about Cold War deception. She started watching him, discreetly of course. From behind her curtains during her walks with her scruffy terrier Buster, she noted his patterns. Woke up at 6 a.m., newspaper delivered exactly at 6:30. Left for his walk at 7:15, always down the same street, always returning at 7:45. His car, a sensible sedan, was always parked precisely in the middle of his driveway. But then the anomalies started to emerge. Small things. Things no one else would notice. Like the way his car, a plain silver sedan, was sometimes parked slightly off-center when he returned, only to be perfectly aligned again moments later, as if someone else had driven it and he had reparked it. Or the way he always took the long route to the grocery store, even though the shorter one was faster. A scenic drive, perhaps, or a deliberate detour. One Tuesday, Eleanor saw him talking on his front porch. To whom? No one was there. He was speaking into his hand, a tiny gesture, almost imperceptible. Like he was holding something to his mouth, a walkie-talkie, a hidden microphone. Her imagination, fueled by fear and historical knowledge, was running wild, or was it? She tried to confide in her best friend Carol, a fellow teacher. "Carol, I think someone put a listening device in my house." Carol, bless her heart, laughed. "Oh, Eleanor, you've been watching too many documentaries. You're probably just hearing things. Maybe it's a faulty smoke detector." Eleanor knew it wasn't. But Carol's dismissal only reinforced her isolation. Who would believe her? The silence of being disbelieved was almost as terrifying as the initial discovery. It confirmed that she was alone in this, alone against an unknown enemy. This wasn't just about a bug anymore. This was about proving her sanity, about validating her gut feeling that something was deeply, fundamentally wrong. Eleanor, the methodical historian, decided she needed to document everything. She bought a small notebook, discreetly labeled lesson plans, and began a secret journal. Every strange occurrence, every fleeting observation, every anomaly related to Mr. Davies went into that notebook. The slightly off car parking, the solo porch conversations, the strange, almost imperceptible flicker of light in his attic window late at night. The unusual number of packages delivered to his house, always small, always unmarked. She started cross-referencing. She knew the general operational patterns of Cold War spies. They rarely worked alone. There were handlers, couriers, safe houses. If Mr. Davies was indeed a spy, he would be part of a larger network. But a network of what? And operating for whom? The Soviet Union was gone. Was it Russia? A rogue faction? Her research into cricket devices also yielded another crucial detail. They often required a nearby receiver, a drop-off point for the collected audio data, a dead drop or a close contact. The thought sent a shiver down her spine. If the device was in her house and Mr. Davies was the operator, then he was literally 2 doors down. The receiver, the safe house, could be his house. The casual waves he gave her now felt like a taunt. His polite smiles, a mask. He wasn't just a neighbor. He was the reason her walls had ears. He was the reason her peace had been shattered. And he was so close she could almost touch him. Eleanor's routine, once a source of comfort, became a carefully choreographed ballet of observation and paranoia. She moved through her days with a forced calm, her mind a whirling vortex of possibilities. Every interaction was a test, every glance a potential clue. The world had become a puzzle, and she, the reluctant solver. She started with the house itself. The cricket device was old school. It needed to be retrieved periodically for the data to be downloaded. That meant someone had to get in, but how? Her locks were solid. There were no signs of forced entry. This wasn't a smash-in grab. This was far more insidious. This was a long-term operation. She remembered the property history of her house. It had changed hands several times over the decades. Had the device been placed during a previous ownership and reactivated, or was it more recent? She recalled the recent internet outages, the faint smudges on her mail. That pointed to recent activity. Someone with access or someone who could create access. Her investigation widened beyond Mr. Davies. She started looking at the entire neighborhood, not just as a cluster of homes, but as a potential operational zone. Who else had moved in recently? Who had odd hours? who received packages that seemed out of place. She reviewed old neighborhood newsletters, online forums, anything that could give her a broader picture. She noticed a pattern with some of Mr. Davies' walks. They weren't always random. Sometimes he would pause near the public library's outdoor book drop, not to drop a book but to linger, his eyes scanning. Or he would briefly stand near a particular old oak tree in the park, adjusting his watch almost like a signal. These were classic dead drop locations, straight out of her Cold War history lessons. Coincidences, or carefully planned rendezvous points. One afternoon, while gardening near her front hedge, Eleanor saw something that solidified her suspicions about the oak tree. Mr. Davies finished his walk, paused by the tree and bent down, seemingly to tie his shoelace. But his hand, instead of reaching for his foot, subtly brushed against the rough bark of the tree. When he stood up, he paused for a fraction of a second too long, his eyes sweeping the street. Then he continued his walk home, whistling a cheerful tune. A minute later, a battered old pickup truck one she'd never seen in the neighborhood before drove slowly past the tree. The driver, a young man with a baseball cap pulled low, didn't stop, but his hand, as he passed, briefly, almost imperceptibly, darted out the window near the base of the oak. He didn't pick anything up. He dropped something off. Eleanor couldn't see what it was, but the sequence was too perfect, too practiced. This wasn't just Mr. Davies. This was a network. The young man in the truck was a courier. The oak tree was a dead drop, and Mr. Davies was a node in that network. The implications sent a jolt of fear mixed with a strange kind of vindication. She wasn't crazy. Her gut feeling was right. But with this confirmation came a chilling realization. The danger was far greater than she had imagined. She was no longer just an unwitting target of surveillance. She was an observer of an active, ongoing espionage operation. And if they realized she was watching, what would they do? The surveillance became a two-way street. She was watching them, but she also felt their eyes on her. The subtle shifts in Mr. Davies' demeanor. His smile, once neutral, now seemed to hold a flicker of something colder, sharper, when their paths crossed. She imagined the tiny cricket device in her yearbook box, still dormant, but a chilling reminder of the enemy within. One evening, her porch light, which had been working fine for years, suddenly flickered and died. She went outside to check the bulb. As she stood on her dark porch, fumbling with the fixture, she heard a faint, deliberate scrape from Mr. Davies' yard. She looked over. He was standing by his roses, pruning them in the dark without a light. He looked up, and for a split second their eyes met. His smile was gone. His expression was utterly blank. Then, as quickly as it came, it was replaced by his usual polite nod. "Good evening, Eleanor. Having trouble with your light?" he asked, his voice smooth, even. "Oh, just a bulb," she managed, her voice feeling alien in her own throat. "Perhaps a storm," he offered. "These old houses, eh?" It wasn't a storm, it was a warning, a message. "We know you're watching, we can touch you." The incident left her shaken. She installed new, brighter motion sensor lights. She triple-checked her locks. She even bought a cheap fake security camera and pointed it towards Mr. Davies' house, a desperate, childish bluff. Her research deepened. She started looking not just for Soviet spy networks but for specific individuals. Operatives who might have gone deep underground during the collapse of the Soviet Union, only to re-emerge later. Illegals, they were called. Spies living under deep cover, assuming completely new identities, sometimes for decades, waiting for activation. Mr. Davies fit the profile perfectly. The retired engineer, the new resident, the subtle questions about the Cold War. She even risked visiting the Northwood Public Library's microfiche archives. Under the pretense of local history research, she started looking at old newspaper articles, community records, anything that could reveal anomalies in the past. She started cross-referencing names, addresses, and dates. This was dangerous territory. She was leaving a trail. One evening, she found it. A small article from 1982, a local charity gala, a list of attendees. And among them, a name that made her breath catch. Arthur Davies, visiting professor of mechanical engineering at Northwood University. But this Arthur Davies was described as being 30 years younger, with a different wife and a slightly different background. The physical description was vague, but the name was identical. A common name, perhaps, or an old cover repurposed. She felt a dizzying mix of triumph and terror. This was it. This was the chink in the armor. Mr. Davies, her polite, unassuming neighbor, had been in Northwood before, decades ago, right at the height of the Cold War, and he had used the same name but with a completely different backstory. He hadn't just moved to the neighborhood a year ago. He had returned. Eleanor held the crumpled microfiche printout, the grainy image of a younger Arthur Davies staring back at her. The jawline was the same. The eyes, too, held that familiar, piercing intensity. This wasn't a coincidence of names. This was the same man, or at least the same identity used twice. Her Mr. Davies, the retired engineer, was merely the latest iteration of a decades-long deception. The man next door wasn't just a spy. He was a seasoned operative, an illegal. He had been planted here in Northwood likely in the early 80s, then gone dormant only to resurface. The Cold War wasn't over for him. It was a continuous operation. Her focus shifted from how he operated to why. What was so important about Northwood, about her house? This wasn't a military base. This wasn't a government building. This was a typical American suburb. The historical context clicked into place. The Cold War wasn't just about ICBMs and Kremlin secrets. It was also about scientific advancement, industrial espionage, and ideological subversion. Northwood, while seemingly ordinary, did have a few unique characteristics. It was home to a moderately sized but highly respected research university, Northwood University. The very place the Arthur Davies of 1982 was supposedly a visiting professor. And Northwood University had a cutting-edge aerospace engineering department, funded heavily by government grants for research into advanced materials and propulsion systems. Research that would be of immense interest to any foreign power. The pieces started to fall into place, forming a picture far more terrifying than a simple bug in her living room. The cricket device in her fireplace. The re-emergence of Arthur Davies. The university, the aerospace research. It wasn't about her. It was about proximity. Her house was perfectly situated, close enough to the university, close enough to potential targets to serve as a hub, a listening post. She retraced the ownership history of her house with renewed urgency. The previous owner, a Professor Wallace Thorne, had lived there for 30 years before moving into assisted living just a year ago, coincidentally right before Mr. Davies moved in. Professor Thorne. What did he do? A quick search revealed he was a renowned expert in theoretical physics, specializing in quantum mechanics. For decades, he had worked on classified government projects. Classified government projects. Eleanor felt a cold wave wash over her. It wasn't about her teaching the Cold War. It was about her living in a house that once belonged to a man involved in high-level, sensitive research. Her house wasn't just a listening post. It was a legacy of surveillance. The cricket device hadn't been put in for her. It had been put in for Professor Thorne, and it had likely been there for decades. The internet outages, the mail tampering, that was the current network adapting, reactivating old assets. They were collecting information and they were using her home to do it. Mr. Davies, the retired engineer, was likely a legacy asset. An illegal reactivated to resume a long-dormant mission. His job wasn't just to listen to Professor Thorne, who was now safely in assisted living, presumably no longer a source. His job was to maintain the network, potentially recruit new sources, and extract whatever residual intelligence might be left in the physical space, or even from the new occupant, Eleanor herself. They were likely listening to her, hoping she would reveal something about Professor Thorne's past, or perhaps she herself had become a new unwitting data point. The scale of the operation was staggering. It wasn't just a single spy. It was a well-oiled, deeply entrenched network spanning decades with Mr. Davies as its shadowy linchpin. They had waited. They had adapted. And now they were active again in her quiet suburb using her house. Eleanor stared out her window at Mr. Davies' house, the cheerful geraniums now looking like blood-red sentinels. He was not just Arthur Davies, the polite neighbor. He was a ghost from a war that supposedly ended but had merely gone underground. A professional, someone who had honed the art of deception into a deadly science. And he knew she was watching. The dead porch light wasn't a warning, it was a declaration. She realized with a sickening lurch that this wasn't just about discovery anymore. It was about survival. She had stumbled onto something far bigger than she could have ever imagined, a secret spy network operating for unknown purposes, resurrected from the ashes of the Cold War. And her home, her quiet sanctuary, was its unwilling stage. She had the device. She had the name. But what she lacked was proof that anyone would believe, and a way to fight back against a shadow that had been operating for decades. This was no longer a historical lesson. This was her life. The first challenge was the very normalcy of her surroundings. Spies don't wear trench coats and dark glasses in Elmwood Drive. They blend, they become part of the wallpaper. Mr. Davies was the master of bland. His perfect lawn, his polite waves, his predictable routine, it was all a shield. Eleanor knew she couldn't confront him directly. That would only alert him and she'd disappear without a trace, her story dismissed as a crazy old maid's fantasy. She needed to become a ghost herself. Unseen, unheard, observing. Her classroom at Northwood High became her war room. While her students droned through essays on the domino theory, Eleanor was poring over maps of Northwood, marking out potential surveillance points, possible dead drops, and routes Mr. Davies took. She remembered the oak tree, the library book drop. But there had to be more. Professional networks didn't rely on just 1 or 2 points. Her research extended to the subtle art of counter-surveillance. She learned about tells, the tiny, unconscious habits that betray someone under pressure. She began to observe Mr. Davies not just for his patterns, but for his deviations. A slight hesitation before turning a corner, a quick, almost imperceptible glance over his shoulder. The way his eyes scanned a crowd not with casual interest, but with a trained, assessing gaze. She started small. Her walks with Buster became covert operations. She'd linger near the oak tree, pretending to admire the squirrels while carefully scanning the ground. She took different routes through the park, always ensuring she had a clear line of sight to Mr. Davies' usual path. She experimented with varying her own routines, leaving for school at slightly different times, taking a different lane on the road. Did he react? Did his car pull out a moment later? The psychological toll was immense. Every shadow felt like a lurking threat, every sound a potential signal. Sleep became a luxury. She would wake up in the dead of night, her mind racing, replaying conversations, analyzing gestures. She was alone, and the weight of that secrecy was crushing. Then came the bird feeder. Mr. Davies had a rather elaborate bird feeder in his backyard, a charming, multi-tiered affair that attracted all sorts of feathered friends. Eleanor, during one of her gardening sessions, noticed something odd. He meticulously refilled it every Tuesday and Friday morning, always at 7:30 a.m. Always precisely the same amount of birdseed, a picture of quaint suburban life. But one Tuesday, as she watched from her kitchen window, he refilled it, and then instead of immediately returning inside, he paused. He bent down, ostensibly to adjust a loose stone in the pathway leading to the feeder, but his hand dipped for a fraction of a second under the base of the feeder. He didn't adjust anything. He merely touched it, and then he went inside. 2 hours later, a young man, perhaps in his early 20s, drove a beat-up sedan slowly down Elmwood Drive. He stopped briefly about 2 houses down from Mr. Davies, feigning a phone call. Then he got out, walked casually down the sidewalk, and paused directly opposite Mr. Davies' house. He pulled out his phone, looked at it, then very deliberately, almost as if he was stretching, leaned against a small tree near the sidewalk. His hand, as it rested on the tree, brushed the ground at its base. A quick, almost imperceptible flick. Then he walked back to his car and drove off. Eleanor's heart hammered. It was a classic brush pass or dead drop. The bird feeder, the tree, it wasn't about the birds. It was a communication system. A way for Mr. Davies to leave information for a courier or to pick up instructions. The young man was clearly the courier, and the precision of the timing, the seemingly casual actions, spoke volumes of years of training. Eleanor knew she had to be careful. If she tried to tamper with the bird feeder, she'd blow her cover. She needed to observe more to understand the full cycle of the drops, but the act of observation itself was a dangerous game. Mr. Davies wasn't stupid. He was a professional, and he was starting to notice her. The subtle shifts began. She'd find her mail slot ever so slightly ajar even after she'd checked it. Her recycling bin would be moved from its usual spot. Small, seemingly insignificant things. Each one a tiny pinprick, a reminder, I see you. He wasn't overtly threatening, but these gestures were designed to undermine her sense of security, to make her question her own memory, her own sanity. One afternoon, she was grading papers in her living room, deliberately leaving the curtains slightly open. She glanced up, and there he was, standing on his porch, watering his geraniums. His eyes, though, weren't on his flowers, they were on her. He held her gaze for a beat too long, then offered a small, polite nod, almost a smile, but it wasn't friendly. It was knowing, a predator's smile. That night she couldn't shake the feeling that her house wasn't just monitored but entered. She checked everything, nothing obvious. But then she noticed her cricket device. The one she'd hidden in the yearbook box. It was still there, but the lint-free cloth she'd wrapped it in was slightly askew. Had she done that? She couldn't be sure. But the seed of doubt planted by Mr. Davies' earlier games now blossomed into full-blown paranoia. He was inside her head. She knew she couldn't continue in isolation. The stress was too great, but who could she trust? Her best friend, Carol, had already dismissed her. The police were a dead end. She needed someone connected to intelligence, someone who would understand the gravity of a reactivated Cold War illegal. Her mind went back to Professor Thorne. If his research was the initial target, maybe someone else at Northwood University had been aware of his sensitivities. Someone he trusted. She decided to risk it. She scheduled a research visit to the university library, specifically the archives department. She claimed she was looking for more information on the university's role during the Cold War, particularly concerning scientific contributions. The archivist, a kind, bespectacled woman named Dr. Evelyn Reed, was surprisingly helpful. Eleanor subtly steered the conversation towards Professor Thorne, asking about his collaborations, his colleagues, his security protocols. Dr. Reed mentioned that Professor Thorne had always been very private, almost reclusive, but had relied heavily on the support of Dr. Alastair Finch, a former colleague in the physics department who had eventually moved into a high-level administrative role within the university, overseeing research funding and security clearances. Dr. Alastair Finch. The name resonated. Someone in a position of power with knowledge of classified projects and security. This was her target, but before she could act, Mr. Davies made his move. He appeared at her door, unannounced, with a plate of freshly baked cookies. Just thought I'd share, Eleanor. My grandmother's recipe. Figured you might need a pick-me-up. You've seemed a bit distracted lately. His eyes held that unsettling knowingness. Eleanor forced a smile. Oh, Arthur, how thoughtful. Come in for some tea. She hated herself for inviting him, but she knew she couldn't appear suspicious. He declined, but lingered on her porch. You know, Eleanor, he said, his voice dropping slightly, this neighborhood, it's quiet. But sometimes the quietest places hold the biggest stories. You, a historian, you must appreciate that. He paused, his gaze sweeping over her house, lingering for a fraction of a second on the mantelpiece where the cricket device had been. Old houses, old secrets. He smiled again, a completely innocuous, neighborly smile. Just a thought. Then he turned and walked away, leaving Eleanor standing on her porch, her heart pounding, the plate of cookies feeling like a poisonous offering. It was a test, a veiled warning. He knew she was digging. He knew she was close. He was playing with her, deliberately putting her on edge. The struggle was no longer just about gathering evidence. It was about maintaining her composure, her strength in the face of his psychological warfare. Eleanor spent the next few days preparing her case. She compiled her notes, the cricket device details, the 1982 article about Arthur Davies. her observations of the bird feeder dead drop, the courier, and the chilling psychological games Mr. Davies was playing. She knew she couldn't just walk into Dr. Finch's office and spill the beans. She needed to present it like a historical brief, a meticulously researched conspiracy theory, but with undeniable current evidence. She called Dr. Finch's office, requesting a meeting under the guise of discussing a potential Cold War history exhibit for the university archives, hoping to pique his interest in a legitimate way. His assistant scheduled her for the following Tuesday. The wait was agonizing. Every creak of her house, every car that passed, felt like an omen. The meeting with Dr. Finch was formal. His office, high up in the university's main administration building, had a sweeping view of the campus. He was a man in his late 60s, sharp-eyed, with an air of quiet authority. Eleanor began her presentation calmly, outlining her initial discovery of the cricket device, her research into its origins, and then the startling connection to Professor Thorne and the 1982 Arthur Davies article. She watched Dr. Finch's face carefully for any flicker of disbelief, any sign that he thought she was unhinged. He listened, impassively at first. His gaze was steady, thoughtful. But as she laid out the details of Mr. Davies' reemergence, the bird feeder dead drops and his increasingly unsettling behavior, a subtle change occurred. His eyes narrowed. His posture stiffened. He picked up a pen and began to tap it rhythmically on his desk, a tiny, nervous tick. When she finished, the room was silent. "Miss Vance," he said, his voice low, "this is quite a narrative." It wasn't a dismissal. It was an understatement. He leaned forward. "You're telling me you believe a Soviet deep-cover agent, an illegal, has been reactivated in Northwood, operating out of your immediate neighborhood, using your former home as a listening post, and is actively running an intelligence network targeting this university?" "Yes, Dr. Finch," Eleanor stated, her voice firm. "That is exactly what I am saying. And I have reason to believe this network is after classified research still being conducted here, perhaps an evolution of Professor Thorne's work." She paused, then added, "Or perhaps they are attempting to compromise individuals within the university who have access to that research." He stood up and walked to the window, his back to her. "Professor Thorne was a brilliant but at times rather naive man," he mused almost to himself. "His work, yes, it would be of immense interest." He turned back to her, his expression grim. "Ms. Vance, what you're suggesting is highly sensitive. It could have international ramifications." "I understand that, Dr. Finch," Eleanor replied. "But the alternative is to ignore it and let this network operate unchecked. My life, and potentially the security of this university, depends on someone taking this seriously." She pushed her notebook, filled with meticulous observations, across his desk. "I've documented everything." Dr. Finch picked up the notebook. He didn't just glance at it. He opened it and began to read, his eyes scanning each page, each coded entry, each carefully drawn diagram of the dead drop locations. He paused on the entry about the cricket device, then on the picture of the younger Arthur Davies. The tapping of his pen had stopped. He closed the notebook, placed it carefully on his desk, and looked at Eleanor. His expression was no longer one of skepticism, but of deep concern, mingled with a hint of fear. "Miss Vance," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "I believe you." The words were like a dam breaking. A wave of relief so profound it almost buckled her knees washed over Eleanor. She wasn't crazy. Someone believed her. "But," Dr. Finch continued, "this is far more dangerous than you can imagine. If this Arthur Davies is who you say he is, confronting him or even exposing him publicly could have severe consequences. Not just for him, but for everyone involved. For you." He looked at her directly. "Do you understand the kind of power you're up against?" "I'm beginning to," Eleanor admitted, her voice trembling slightly. "But I can't just ignore it. I can't live like this." Dr. Finch nodded slowly. "No, you can't, and neither can we. Professor Thorne's work, the current research, it's too vital, but we must proceed with extreme caution. This network, if it truly exists as you describe, will be deeply entrenched, highly skilled, and ruthless. He picked up the notebook again, his fingers tracing the entries. You've done an extraordinary job, Miss Vance. Far more than any amateur should ever have to do. He stood up again, walked to his office door, and locked it. Then he returned to his desk, his voice now even lower. You've handed me a live wire, Miss Vance. A very, very hot wire. We can't go to the local authorities. This requires a level of discretion and expertise they simply don't possess. And going through official channels, well, we can't risk tipping off any potential moles, not yet. He looked out at the campus. This requires specialized help. Eleanor felt a cold dread mix with the relief. Specialized help. That sounded like something out of a spy novel, but it was real. Her struggle had led to a powerful, if terrifying, payout, a credible witness, an ally, and a path forward. But that path was shrouded in even greater peril. Dr. Finch's belief was a lifeline, but it also painted an even starker picture of the deadly game she was now irrevocably a part of. The whispers had become a roar, and the battle was just beginning. The next 48 hours were a blur of heightened senses and grinding anxiety for Eleanor. She taught her classes on the origins of the Cold War, her voice calm and authoritative, while her mind screamed with the irony of it all. Her students, oblivious, took notes on proxy wars and covert operations, completely unaware that their history teacher was living one. Dr. Finch was true to his word. Late that night, her phone, a secure, untraceable burner phone he'd given her, buzzed with a single text message. Tomorrow, 10 a.m. Northwood Park gazebo. No name, no other instructions, just a time and place. The park meeting was an exercise in spycraft straight out of a Le Carré novel. Eleanor arrived early, dressed inconspicuously, her heart hammering. She sat on a bench, pretending to read a newspaper, scanning the faces of joggers and dog walkers. At precisely 10 a.m., a woman sat down beside her. She was perhaps in her late 30s, athletic, with sharp, intelligent eyes that missed nothing. She wore a simple track suit, a baseball cap pulled low, and carried a water bottle. Utterly unremarkable, utterly professional. Eleanor Vance. The woman asked, her voice low and calm with a slight, unplaceable accent. And you are? Eleanor replied, remembering Dr. Finch's instruction, trust no one until they confirm the specific detail. I'm here about the cricket, the woman said, her eyes meeting Eleanor's. Eleanor exhaled a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Thank God. My name is Agent Thorne, the woman said, her voice betraying no emotion. No relation to the professor, just a useful coincidence, I suppose. I work for a specialized department. She didn't offer a badge or any formal identification. Her presence, her knowledge, was her ID. Dr. Finch filled us in. You've done remarkable work, Miss Vance. Extremely dangerous work. Agent Thorne was efficient, clinical. She absorbed Eleanor's detailed account, flipping through the notebook Eleanor had handed her. She asked precise questions. The exact location of the dead drops, the times, the frequency of the courier, Mr. Davies' routines, his physical description, his possible vulnerabilities. Eleanor felt a surge of relief, finally able to share the crushing burden of her secret. Agent Thorne confirmed the cricket was indeed an authentic, incredibly rare Cold War-era Soviet listening device, specifically designed for long-term, deep-cover operations. Davies, or whatever his real name is an illegal, Agent Thorne explained. These are the ghosts, planted decades ago, often living entirely new lives, waiting for activation. To catch one, you need perfect timing and undeniable proof. She pointed to Eleanor's drawing of the bird feeder dead drop. This is excellent. This is our primary target. But then came the hard part. Ms. Vance, Agent Thorne said, we need you to continue your observations. Your proximity, your familiarity with his patterns, it's invaluable. We'll be setting up discreet surveillance, but you're still our eyes and ears on the ground. You are our most critical asset. Eleanor felt a cold dread settle in her stomach. You mean I'm still alone? You're not alone, Agent Thorne corrected, her gaze steady. You are supported, But for this to work, you must maintain absolute operational security. No one can know we're involved. Not your friends, not your family, not even Dr. Finch beyond what's necessary. And most importantly, Davies cannot suspect you're working with us. Not for a second. Agent Thorne handed her a small, sleek device. This is a secure comms unit. One-way messages mostly, but you can activate it for urgent calls. Follow our instructions precisely. If you feel compromised or if Davies makes an overt move, you use this. If he ever tries to enter your home again or makes a direct threat, you signal us immediately. Eleanor looked at the device, then at Agent Thorne. And what if I don't signal in time? Agent Thorne's expression remained neutral. Then we move in immediately, regardless of the operation. Your safety is paramount, Ms. Vance. But to succeed, you must continue to act like the ordinary teacher he believes you to be. Agent Thorne and her team, a small, virtually invisible unit, moved in with surgical precision. Discreet vans appeared and disappeared from Eleanor Street, their occupants seemingly mundane utility workers or delivery drivers. Tiny, hidden cameras were installed, not just on Davies' house, but also strategically placed to cover key areas of Elmwood Drive and Northwood University. Eleanor felt a strange mix of relief and renewed paranoia. She was being watched, but now by allies. Still, the feeling of constant surveillance was unsettling. Their focus immediately turned to the target of Davies' network. Dr. Finch, after a highly confidential meeting with Agent Thorne, confirmed their worst fears. Professor Thorne's original work in theoretical physics had been foundational to a new, highly sensitive research project at Northwood University, something dealing with advanced quantum computing and encrypted communications, a project with significant national security implications. This was the prize. This was why Davies was reactivated. The question was, how was he planning to get it? The bird feeder dead drop was for intelligence passing, but not for direct infiltration. He needed physical access, or a compromised insider. Eleanor, armed with new understanding, became a more effective observer. She noticed that Davies had begun taking particular interest in the university's annual Innovation Showcase, a public event where various departments presented their latest breakthroughs. It was scheduled for the following week, and the quantum computing department was slated to have a prominent display. This was his opportunity. The showcase would be crowded, security would be stretched, and the display would offer a glimpse, perhaps even a vulnerability, into the project. Agent Thorne believed Davies would try to plant a sophisticated data exfiltration device, a new cricket of sorts during the showcase, or attempt to photograph sensitive documents. They needed to anticipate his move, but also to control it. They needed a lure. He suspects you, Ms. Vance, Agent Thorne explained during a late-night hushed conversation in Eleanor's living room. He's playing mind games. We need to turn that against him. Their plan was audacious and terrifying. Eleanor would become the primary bait. The university's IT department, working under strict instructions from Agent Thorne, discovered a minor security vulnerability in the network access points near the quantum computing exhibit. This vulnerability was then patched, but a specific, deliberately left unpatched access point was created, broadcasting a weak, encrypted signal. This signal was designed to look like a small, highly compressed data packet related to the quantum project, just enough to pique an enemy's interest, but completely harmless. A digital breadcrumb. Eleanor's role was crucial. She was to subtly discover a seemingly innocuous document related to the quantum project that mentioned this vulnerability. She would then, through a meticulously choreographed series of actions, make it appear as though she had accidentally left it visible on her kitchen counter, just long enough for Davies to observe it. She had to ensure he saw it. The psychological pressure was immense. She knew Davies was watching her. Every move, every gesture had to be natural. This wasn't about acting. It was about living a lie under the most dangerous circumstances. The document was a fake, created by Agent Thorne's team, designed to appear like an internal memo discussing the security patch, and crucially, mentioning the specific, vulnerable network access point that would be live during the showcase. Eleanor's heart hammered as she placed the document on her counter, feigning forgetfulness. She then went about her morning routine, acutely aware of the silent eyes watching her from 2 doors down. She watered her plants. She hummed a tuneless song. She deliberately left her kitchen window slightly ajar. Later that day, Mr. Davies, in his usual evening walk with his dog, lingered a little longer than usual outside her kitchen window. Eleanor watched him from her living room, her breath held tight. He didn't make any overt moves, but his head tilted almost imperceptibly towards her window. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. He had seen it. He had taken the bait. The next piece of the puzzle was the dead drop. Agent Thorne believed that Davies would need to communicate this critical piece of intelligence quickly to his handlers. He'll use the bird feeder, Agent Thorne predicted. It's his established method, and he'll be confident in it. Eleanor's task was to plant a miniature, high-resolution camera near the bird feeder, disguised as a common garden ornament, before Davies' next scheduled drop. The camera would capture not only Davies' actions, but also, hopefully, what he dropped or picked up. It was a perilous mission, placing her dangerously close to him, directly in his zone of operation. The delayed payout was the hope of catching him red-handed, linking him definitively to active espionage. But the struggle was the terrifying reality of putting herself in harm's way, right on the precipice of his lethal game. The day of the Northwood University Innovation Showcase dawned bright and deceptively normal. But for Eleanor, it felt like the eve of battle. Her stomach was a knot of nerves. She had successfully planted the miniature camera near the bird feeder 2 nights prior, disguised as a ceramic toadstool. It was a terrifying ordeal, creeping through her own yard under the cover of darkness, every rustle of leaves sounding like an alarm. Agent Thorne's team had confirmed it was transmitting a clear feed. They had captured Davies' bird feeder drop that very morning. He'd left a tiny, tightly folded piece of paper, securing it with a small stone under the feeder. The camera, positioned perfectly, had captured the entire sequence. The team quickly retrieved the drop. It contained a coded message, a brief report about the vulnerability at the university showcase, with instructions for a rendezvous at the event itself. This confirmed their theory. Davies would attempt to exploit the vulnerability himself, or hand off the information to another operative who would. The university showcase was a vibrant, chaotic scene. Students, faculty, and curious members of the public milled about, admiring displays ranging from robotics to biotechnology. The quantum computing exhibit was particularly popular, drawing a steady crowd. Agent Thorne's team was everywhere and nowhere, blending seamlessly into the background. Eleanor, dressed in her usual teacher attire, moved through the crowd, playing her role, observing, waiting. Dr. Finch, looking impeccably academic, was also present, ostensibly greeting dignitaries. Davies arrived punctually, an innocuous figure in a tweed jacket, blending perfectly with the university setting. He moved slowly, deliberately, through the different exhibits, his gaze always returning to the quantum computing display. Eleanor watched him from a distance, her heart pounding. His eyes, usually guarded, now held a glint of predatory focus. He eventually positioned himself near the back of the quantum computing exhibit, pretending to be engrossed in a particularly complex diagram. But Eleanor noticed his hand, almost imperceptibly, reaching into his jacket pocket. This was it. He was going for his device. Just then, a distraction occurred. A carefully orchestrated, controlled chaos. A fire alarm, muffled but insistent, began to sound. Not a full evacuation, but enough to create a momentary stir, a ripple of confusion through the crowd. This was Agent Thorne's signal, a window of opportunity. Davies, for a split second, hesitated. His eyes darted around. He saw the brief moment of disarray, the perfect cover. His hand moved faster. He pulled out a device, a tiny, sleek, almost invisible USB stick, no bigger than his thumb. He leaned forward, aiming for the specific, vulnerable network port they had prepared. But before his device could connect, a hand shot out, not from Agent Thorne's team, but from Eleanor. Driven by an instinct she didn't know she possessed, Eleanor had moved. She wasn't an agent, but she was a teacher protecting her turf, protecting her university. She had seen him making his move, and her body reacted. She didn't grab his hand. She didn't cause a scene. Instead, in a move that was both accidental and deliberate, she tripped ever so slightly, bumping into him. Her coffee cup, held loosely in her hand, slipped and spilled directly onto the quantum computing display table, narrowly missing the vulnerable port but soaking Davies' hand and the small USB stick. "Oh, Mr. Davies, I am so terribly sorry," Eleanor exclaimed, her voice a perfect blend of genuine apology and feigned clumsiness. "How awful of me. Are you all right? Did I ruin anything?" Davies froze. His eyes, usually so controlled, flashed with genuine fury and surprise. The USB stick, wet and potentially damaged, was still clutched in his hand. The momentary distraction of the coffee, the accident, it had stopped him. He opened his mouth to speak, but before a single word could escape, Agent Thorne and two other operatives who had been positioning themselves moved in. They were not in tactical gear, but their movements were swift, decisive. "Arthur Davies," Agent Thorne said, her voice calm but authoritative, "you're under arrest for espionage. Drop the device." Davies looked at Eleanor, his face contorted into a mask of pure hatred. He knew. He knew she wasn't just a clumsy teacher. He tried to resist, but the agents were too quick. In a practiced maneuver, they secured him, disarming him of the USB stick, and swiftly led him away through a service exit, all while the background hum of the fire alarm and the lingering confusion of the crowd provided perfect cover. Barely anyone noticed. Eleanor stood there, trembling, the empty coffee cup still in her hand, staring at the spot where Davies had been. The quiet history teacher had just confronted a Cold War spy, and she had won. The delayed payout was the absolute triumph of seeing the shadow finally captured, the ghost finally materialized. But the struggle, the sheer, heart-stopping terror of that moment, would forever be etched in her memory. The immediate aftermath was a whirlwind of activity. Agent Thorne whisked Eleanor away to a secure, undisclosed location, a nondescript government building far from Northwood. The USB stick Davies had attempted to plant was quickly secured and analyzed. It contained a sophisticated data siphon, designed to silently exfiltrate massive amounts of information from the university's network, activated by the specific vulnerability they had created. Had Eleanor not intervened, it would have been a catastrophic breach. Davies himself was taken to a specialized interrogation facility. It took days, but under intense, expert questioning by Agent Thorne and her colleagues, the facade began to crack. His true name was Anatoly Volkov, and he was indeed a highly trained, illegal agent of the SVR, the Foreign Intelligence Service of Russia, the successor to the KGB. He had been originally planted in the U.S. in the late 1970s, establishing a cover as a technical engineer. The Arthur Davies identity he used in Northwood in 1982 was a test run, a temporary cover for an initial assessment mission related to Professor Thorne's early work. He had then gone deep undercover in another city, only to be reactivated a year ago and sent back to Northwood, specifically to target the quantum computing project, which was a direct evolution of Thorne's pioneering theories. His network was extensive but fragmented. Volkov was a node, a facilitator, a primary collector of raw intelligence. The young man in the pickup truck was a low-level courier, an unwitting pawn who simply delivered and picked up packages, unaware of their true contents. Volkov's capture, however, provided critical leads, revealing dead drops and communication methods that allowed Agent Thorne's team to roll up several other peripheral assets in different states. The web wasn't a single monolithic entity but a series of interconnected semi-autonomous cells, with Volkov's Northwood cell being one of the most critical. Eleanor sat in a sterile debriefing room, listening to Agent Thorne explain the findings. She felt a profound weariness, but also a quiet sense of triumph. She, an ordinary history teacher, had helped dismantle a sophisticated spy network. Volkov was a ghost, MS. Vance, Agent Thorne said, her voice filled with a rare hint of respect. Decades of deep cover. Very few in his position are ever caught. Your keen observation skills, your historical knowledge, and your incredible courage were instrumental. You saved us years of intelligence gathering, and potentially saved extremely sensitive national security information from falling into enemy hands. Eleanor learned that the cricket device in her fireplace had indeed been planted during Professor Thorne's tenure, likely by Volkov himself during his earlier reconnaissance in 1982. It had been reactivated remotely a year ago, when Volkov returned to Northwood. Her internet outages and mail tampering were part of his initial reassessment of the property, confirming its continued value as a listening post, even with a new occupant. He had been listening to her, hoping to glean information about Professor Thorne's past associates, or perhaps to identify a new vulnerability within the university through her everyday conversations. The full scope of Volkov's mission was chilling. He wasn't just after the quantum computing research. He was also tasked with identifying potential sources of influence within the university and local government, individuals who could be cultivated for future operations. His neighborly demeanor was a cover for a methodical assessment of the entire community. Eleanor asked about the personal cost. What about my life? Is it safe now? Agent Thorne assured her. Volkov is contained. His network here has been severely disrupted. We'll be monitoring for any retaliatory actions, but the immediate threat to you is gone. We'll be setting you up with new security protocols, discreetly, of course. Your identity as an asset will remain completely classified. Eleanor returned home a week later a different woman. The familiar walls of her house felt both comforting and haunted. The air conditioner still hummed. The crickets still sang. But she saw everything with new eyes. The quiet hum of suburban life no longer felt quite so innocent. The world was full of shadows, and she had just walked through one. The delayed payout was the absolute certainty that she had made a difference, that her instincts and her courage had protected her country. But the struggle left an indelible mark, a permanent understanding of the hidden world beneath the surface of everyday life. Life, for Eleanor Vance, slowly returned to a semblance of normal. She went back to teaching at Northwood High, guiding her students through the intricacies of the Cold War. But the lessons now held a deeper, more personal resonance. When she spoke of intelligence agencies, of covert operations, of the silent battles fought beneath the surface, her words carried the weight of experience. She wasn't just recounting history, she was part of it. Her students, though, remained blissfully unaware. To them, she was still MS. Vance, the passionate history teacher who occasionally got lost in a tangent about some obscure historical footnote. That was her new cover story, her new normal. Her secret, shared only with Dr. Finch and Agent Thorne, was a heavy cloak she would wear for the rest of her life. Mr. Davies' house remained empty for a few months, a stark, silent reminder of the phantom who once lived there. Eventually, a young family moved in, their laughter and bright decorations erasing the last traces of Anatoly Volkov's chilling deception. The bird feeder was replaced with a swing set. The oak tree, however, still stood, its bark now a silent witness to a brush past that changed everything. Eleanor never spoke of her experience to anyone else. Agent Thorne had explained the importance of maintaining operational security, not just for national security but for Eleanor's own safety. The SVR was a patient and long-memoried organization, but occasionally she would receive a discreet, unmarked envelope in her mailbox containing a brief, cryptic note from Agent Thorne. Threat level minimal. Ongoing monitoring. Thanks again, Professor. The professor was Thorne's private nod to Eleanor's incredible contribution, a recognition of her unique intellect and bravery. The cricket device, once a terrifying intruder in her living room, now resided in a secure intelligence archive, a relic of a war that had never truly ended, only evolved. It served as a testament to the enduring vigilance required to protect national secrets, and to the extraordinary courage of an ordinary individual who refused to look away. Eleanor Vance became an unsung hero. No medals, no public recognition, just the quiet satisfaction of knowing she had faced a formidable enemy, armed with nothing but her wits and her will, and emerged victorious. Her story wasn't one of explosions and car chases, but of observation, analysis, and quiet courage, the true, often unseen, nature of intelligence work. She understood now that history wasn't just something that happened in dusty books. It was a living, breathing force, constantly shaping the present, with roots that stretched back into forgotten wars and dormant networks. Her encounter with Anatoly Volkov taught her that the greatest threats often wear the most ordinary disguises, and that sometimes the most profound acts of heroism come not from soldiers or spies, but from the quiet, determined spirit of an American school teacher who dared to ask questions, and then dared to find the answers. The Cold War, as Eleanor Vance discovered, wasn't just a chapter in history books. It was a simmering reality, with agents and networks lying dormant, waiting for their moment to strike. Eleanor's incredible journey reminds us that vigilance is always required, and that heroism can be found in the most unexpected places. If you found Eleanor's story of uncovering a Soviet spy network in a quiet American suburb as compelling as we did, then you won't want to miss our this deep dive. And make sure to hit the subscribe button.